Five Nights at Freddy's security breach left us with more questions than answers. To be fair, most FNAF games do. But there's one major question that everyone's been trying to crack at that's spiderwebbed through the entire lore of the game. Why is Vanny like that? Now, I'm already very confident that Vanny is a warped personality inside the brain of Vanessa made by Glitchtrap. I'll link my video for evidence at the end of this video. But for now, this theory will assume that as fact. The question I never really got to is why? Why would Glitchtrap, and by extension William Afton, want to create a Vanny? Is it just to have a soldier to enact chaos in the real world? Or is it deeper than that? Well, I think I've got a really compelling theory here that explains not only Glitchtrap's motives, but a lot of other mysteries we've yet to really crack at, like Patient 46, the weird hidden Afton room, and even Vanny's childlike demeanor in general. So, let's bake ourselves a theory. Oh, and since you liked Casey in the last video, I figured I'd bring Mark for this one. He's a snugglebug. Before we can understand why Glitchtrap does the things he does, we need to understand what Glitchtrap is. So let's do a profile. We see Glitchtrap being able to physically manifest inside of a video game when the parts of Springtrap remaining after Pizza Simulator are scanned into the system. We also know that he is one entity, as when he's split up on the hidden tapes, he's more of a see-through specter. But the more pieces of him we collect, the more opaque he becomes. Finally, we see him directly do several things. 1. Trap the player in a Freddy animatronic. 2. Trap the player's mind in some sort of locked basement. And most worrying, 3. Merge with the player's mind. Glitchtrap is sort of a living virus, having a physical manifestation and abilities far beyond any actual virus there is. I believe that Glitchtrap is a manifestation of agony, Afton's agony, within the game of Help Wanted. For those of you who don't know, the books, which frankly I haven't read, go into the idea of agony, the strongest human emotion becoming animate, usually by possessing something or taking a form all its own, like RxQ. I think that the Pizzeria Simulator fire burned away all of the remnant that was still there pre-FNAF 6, leaving all that remains agony. Therefore, the only thing that could have been left is Afton's agony. That agony was then scanned into Help Wanted when they scanned old parts that contained Springtrap. Once the agony of William Afton entered the system, it formed a sort of digital specter. Because of this, Glitchtrap isn't quite William Afton, but just his worst memories and traits come to life. His aggression, his penchant for child abduction, his pride. So we have an idea of who Glitchtrap is, and what he's capable of. The question then becomes, what's the deal with Vanny? Why is she like that? Well, let's do a profile on her. I'm going to start only with things that are fully confirmed and canon. This is just going to be the facts of the game, so expect some vagueness here. Vanny is presumably a human wearing a rabbit costume in the style of a mascot. She has several dens located inside of the Pizzaplex, and it is implied she lives there, judging based off of the beds within them. She has some sort of control over the animatronics, as Freddy states that she made them come down there. Speaking of there, she's been helping to create a body for Glitchtrap or William Afton to possess. From what we can see of the Princess Quest arcade cabinets, Glitchtrap has some sort of influence or connection on Vanny. We also know that she acts very childlike, skipping around and asking simplistic questions when chasing Gregory. Finally, she looks identical to Vanessa the Night Guard. All of that was canon and factual evidence. Now back to the theorizing. I think that it's very likely that Vanny and Vanessa are the same person, and that Vanny is the side of Vanessa being controlled by Glitchtrap in order to effect change within the Pizzaplex. But the question still looms overhead. Why would Glitchtrap create a Vanny? Why would he want this childlike soldier to do his every command when we see that he can just enter the mind of somebody? I am here to stake my claim that Glitchtrap is filled with every negative aspect of William Afton, including possibly his only regret, the death of his daughter, Elizabeth Afton. And it's because of that regret, a few other things we'll get into, that he's trying to replace her with Vanny. I know that was a big claim, but I've got bigger evidence to substantiate it, and we can solve some other mysteries of the Pizzaplex along the way. And by the way, this theory was made a lot easier by talking it over with some of the folks in the bakery, the official RyeTwo's Discord. So you can subscribe to become a slice, but join over there to talk about nerd stuff, FNAF theorize, we have a community Minecraft server. It's a really fun time. Although it is 18 plus, not because we do weird stuff, but I'm just 24, I don't want to hang out with a bunch of minors. Anyways, sorry for the plug, back to the video. Realistically, I think there's two reasons for Afton to want another Elizabeth. First off, as baby, she was incredibly obedient and willing to do anything for him.
Now we can do what we were created to do, and be complete. I will make you proud, Daddy.
That alone is a very worthwhile ally to have, whether or not he feels any regret about her death. He has to recognize how useful she is to him. But more theoretically, I think Glitchtrap regrets her death. Agony is made up of the worst parts of a human, and I think somewhere deep down in that fucked up little mini Grinch of a heart of William Afton, he regrets Elizabeth's death. Think about it. He warns her multiple times and doesn't let her play with baby. For some reason, he cares about Elizabeth living. There's even a chance that her death is what spawned all of this child murder in the first place, because we really don't know if she was the first or third victim here. Look, I'm not trying to convince you that William Afton is Father of the Year. He's probably one of the most cruel, vindictive, worst, horrible dads in all of media, but I am saying that a digital version of him made from his own agony might have a regret. Furthermore, I don't think making Vanny was his first plan. I think he originally wanted to become someone. In one of the Help Wanted endings, we see Glitchtrap trying to almost merge with the player, and for a split second we begin seeing through his eyes, and then the game abruptly cuts off. My thinking is that this ending is showing us what happened to Jeremy, the first tester. I think Glitchtrap originally planned to escape into the mind of the first sucker who entered the game, but midway through finally getting out, the human did the unthinkable just to prevent it. He cut off his own face. He must have realized that anyone would be willing to go to such extreme measures when they realized what was happening during such a slow process. He had to make a new plan. And if he couldn't become someone, he would have to dominate someone to make them make a body that he could become. And when he decided he had to make an indestructible person, who better than his own obedient daughter? Specifically onto how he made Vanny out of Vanessa, I think there's a key line in the therapy CDs, which we're going to go a lot into later, that explain how it happened. In CD 11, Vanessa breaks for a moment and mentions him.
I can't talk about this. He said he would always be watching. He could be here, or there, or anywhere in between.
Are you talking about your dad? Have those feelings come up again? I hate sounding like a broken record, but this is something you really need to resolve if you're ever going to be happy.
I have. I compartmentalized him. He's locked away.
The therapist here is assuming that Vanessa is talking about her reported abusive father, but I think she's talking about Glitchtrap. He's compartmentalized in her brain, literally. Just like a separated hard drive, Glitchtrap made a partition within Vanessa's brain, wiped it clean, and put as much Vanny in it as he could. Thus, we get Vanny and Vanessa sharing the same mind. I want to clear the air. I didn't want to really get into this, but I've seen it posted a disturbing amount of times, even on this channel. No, Vanessa doesn't have dissociative identity disorder. That's a real mental health problem that affects real people. There's already plenty of terrible representation in the media for people afflicted with DID. We don't need to make Vanny another one. This is a franchise with robot bears and sci-fi digi-ghosts. We can explain Vanny using that. We don't need to bring in real-world mental health problems that affect millions of real-world people. It's unrepresentative, it's harmful, and it's unnecessary. Anyway, rant done. So if we assume that Vanny is as close of a copy to Elizabeth that Glitchtrap could create, what does that help us explain? For one, the rest of the therapy CDs. It would very likely tell us that Patient 46 is Vanny. Patient 46 is seen as a childish foil to Vanessa. A whiz with hacking is manipulating someone through an encrypted log that looks like they're talking to themselves and is seen at the Pizzaplex hacking into things and creating a virus. Oh, you want down? Bye, Mark. If Vanny is an attempt at an obedient daughter to William Afton, this all tracks. She'd have to be good at hacking to accomplish the goals at the Pizzaplex that William Afton wants her to. She'd be childish because Glitchtrap wanted to recreate that child. And who would she be manipulating through this encrypted log? Vanessa, the same person who in these therapy CDs is confirmed to be being manipulated through an encrypted log that looks like she's talking to herself. How else would two minds within one body communicate to each other? I have another piece of somewhat circumstantial evidence linking these CDs, but it blew my mind when I noticed it. All of Vanessa's CDs start with 71, and the silent patient who we're going to assume is Vanny start with 46. But those aren't the only numbers there. The first number represents what sequential order they happened in, and the last two numbers are in order of those tapes individually. But have you noticed it? The last tape for 71, Vanessa, ends on 46, and the first tape for 46, Vanny, starts at 72. It's like they line up perfectly. To be clear, they don't happen in that order, they happen in this order, but I just want to put that out there. These CDs also tell us how far Vanny was willing to go to become William's daughter. The therapist recounts Vanessa's awful childhood in CD 3.
Your dad made you follow instructions, didn't he? I'm talking about the custody battle between your mum and your dad. Your dad didn't play fair, did he? He used to make your mum look bad in court. I'm so sorry that happened to you. Do you want to talk about how that felt? I suppose I don't need you to tell me it felt bad to have a parent scare you into saying things that weren't true. He manipulated you. It wasn't your fault. It's really sad, but it's common for one parent to use their child to hurt the other parent. I know your mum after she lost the custody case.
Notably, in the last CD, CD 16, the therapist is berating Vanny for making up the story about her parents, how she actually had a wonderful childhood with great parents. And the story that was presented in her files is a lie. So how would she have changed her personal files to show that? Who would have changed it? Why would the files be changed to a story about a father named Bill manipulating his daughter to win custody against their mother? We have the answer to that in CD 5.
What you might not know is that this person who's been sending you messages has been hacking into your personal files too. These are the same files I have here. These files are full of details about your life. Do you know what that means?
The person on the manipulating end of Vanessa's encrypted chat log is hacking into her personal files and has full access to them. The person on the other end of the encrypted log is Vanny. Vanny is hacking into Vanessa's, their own personal files, and changing their familial history to write essentially a fan fiction on how she's actually the true daughter of William Afton. One that survived. One that was a perfect, obedient little girl to him. She's literally rewriting her past, and she's rebuilding her present. Look at the room that we play these CDs in. The hidden Afton room, a recreation of the living room from the Afton household we see in Sister Location. Why would it be here? If not for Vanny to pretend or roleplay that she's part of the happy Afton family, sitting in her father's house, watching TV.
The newest Tales from the Pizzaplex book is starting to make its way early to shelves, and I can't get my hands on it yet. I'm trying my best. My Barnes & Noble usually puts it out early, but they haven't yet, so I can't find it. But some very kind folks in the community have been posting screenshots and summaries of the book, so I know what happens. And this FNAF book is huge. I'll definitely be making a few videos on some of the stories, but I want to start with the epilogues, specifically what it tells us about Burntrap. So slices, put on your aprons, and let's bake ourselves a theory. First, let's gather our ingredients. So what exactly happens in this book? Well, I'm not going to summarize all of it, because frankly, I would just be plagiarizing summaries I've already read, like the one ID's Fantasy put on Twitter. Go follow her, by the way. Instead, I'm just going to go over what's important for today's discussion, including some of the info from the past books. So, spoiler alert for these books. We'll start with the most recent book, Tiger Rock, specifically the epilogue within it. Now, for those who haven't read any of the Tales from the Pizzaplex books, the epilogues follow an endoskeleton named the Mimic and how it kills a bunch of people. It begins with the endoskeleton arriving at the construction site underneath the Pizzaplex, specifically at the FNAF 6 pizzeria. A few construction workers were given directions to take apart the staff bots that were littered around the place, but one of the construction workers notices that the Mimic has specific good programming on it and decides to program it to take apart the staff bots and pile them up. And it does this pretty well. It saves them a lot of time. Unfortunately, he didn't put a stop function in it. So once it runs out of staff bots, it turns to the construction workers and starts ripping off their heads and limbs and putting them in a pile. The first story ends there. The rest of the epilogues follow a group of teens that break into that pizzeria to try to sneak around and then have to survive. The teens begin getting killed off one by one, but throughout this process, we learn a lot more about the Mimic. We learn that an entire line of them was produced by Fazbear Entertainment. They were made to fit into any animatronic costume and could be programmed just by watching things and, well, mimicking them. It was supposed to be a cost-cutting measure, but they were discontinued after they recreated human interactions in unexpected ways. In Tiger Rock, we specifically hear about one of them mimicking hide and seek, and that it learned it long ago. This could imply that it saw one of the missing child incidents and started recreating that, but we're not sure. In another story, The Mimic, we learn even more about it, that the original one was made by someone named Edwin Murray, and it was built to recreate the actions of his kid, David, so that his kid would have someone to play with. But after David died, Edwin beat the Mimic senselessly and infected it with agony, which is why it does its daily chores, but in a violent way. Oh, goodbye. So much hair. Back to the present, and at this point we just are left with Kelly and Lucia. All the other teens are dead. They get the idea that if they hide in animatronic costumes, the Mimic might not notice them and will just walk past as they try to escape. Eventually, the Mimic walks past and they put this to the test. It works for a moment, but the Mimic takes interest in what Kelly is wearing, a blue dog costume, and it decides to put on the costume, crushing Kelly inside incredibly violently, like vividly violently. This is a very violent series of books. It's likely that this fusion could have caused Burntrap. The current speculation says that this is how Burntrap was made, fusing into Kelly's corpse. Now, there's more things from these books that I do want to talk about when we theorize, but I'll bring them up in context. So for now, let's take our ingredients, mix them together, and see what kind of theories start to form. That being said, currently, I personally believe that these books are functioning in a similar way to the novels, albeit a lot more closely connected. The Silver Eyes novel trilogy gave us additional context and information about Five Nights at Freddy's, while telling a different story. They gave us methods and rules for this universe. So, what are the Tales books trying to give us? Well, specifically for this theory, I think there's definitely a recurring theme in these stories of merging the lines between animatronic and human, synthetic and living. And a lot of people have been picking up on this blended boundary in these stories, from things like Billy trying to be an animatronic in B7, or Astrid being turned into an animatronic by Nexi, and even now with the possibility of the Mimic fusing to Kelly in this horrific incident. I think one of the things that these books are trying to do is tell us how Burntrap came to be. However, I don't think that that's just what the endgame for the epilogues will be. Here's why. First off, I don't totally see how crushing somebody's body with an endoskeleton could turn into Burntrap. Burntrap looks deliberately fused together, they are intertwined and laced around, but Kelly's death seems more accidental and chaotic and just brute force, rather than a surgical connection. Second, and I've mentioned this before, I don't personally yet see any direct evidence or indirect evidence of Kelly existing in the games, let alone being Burntrap. Do I think it's possible or even likely that this just kills Kelly and this Mimic endoskeleton later in the epilogues becomes Burntrap? Totally possible, totally likely. But I don't yet see how Kelly becomes our main antagonist of Security Breach. It's weird video game storytelling, especially because the stories themselves in the Tales books already gives us a way more plausible version of Burntrap's creation in Nexi. Now, this is one of the 3 stories in the last book of the series, Nexi. Well, the story is Nexi and the book is named after it, so they're both Nexi, technically. It's one that I think was overlooked because it mostly seems pretty separate from anything important in the FNAF games. It feels like one of those stories that they just add onto the book to tell a fun, cool, spooky story. Because, admittedly, on the surface, it does seem rather unimportant to the grand scheme of things, but I actually think it's very important. So, spoiler alert, but I'm going to catch you up on the summary of Nexi. Not super in-depth, but at least the important points like we did for the epilogues. Essentially, it's Ron's Gone Wrong, but violent. Okay, but seriously, Nexi follows the story of a poor girl named Astrid who wants a buddy-tronic. It's a 2.5 foot tall plush with an endoskeleton and programming inside of it, so it's basically like a walking and talking living doll. She finally is able to get one, but as it's being built by the weird automatic Build-A-Bear machine they have, the storyteller starts going haywire. The machine almost breaks, but it does produce a doll, a malformed, coldly staring, not quite right doll. But Astrid loves it anyway and takes it out. When the doll starts to look around and gain consciousness, it notices that many of the kids at school pick on Astrid and the doll for looking undesirable or ugly. Astrid assures her that it's what's on the inside that counts, but the doll is certain that both of them are ugly and both of them could be better. Days go by and the doll gets more and more obsessed with looking conventionally attractive. It also becomes more and more violent in defending Astrid. Eventually, Astrid caves, and the doll convinces her to sneak into the animatronic spare parts room in the Pizzaplex and build them a new endoskeleton. Specifically, build the doll a conventionally attractive, correctly proportioned, larger endoskeleton. And she does it pretty successfully. But when the endoskeleton is built, the doll doesn't use it. Instead, the doll kills Astrid and fits her body around the endoskeleton, making her into a weird, living animatronic. Okay, now do you see why I think this book is so important? We literally get a person being surgically basically grafted onto an endoskeleton. This is how I think Burntrap was made, in a way. Not literally this story, but this method. It would certainly explain things like how the body and the endoskeleton are so entwined. At least it explains it a bit more logically than just brute force. There are still some issues with this though. First off, how does the mimic come across William Afton in the first place? And when it does, how does it know to just put on the suit rather than do literally anything else with it? And furthermore, there's still the issue of things not quite lining up between Burntrap and the mimic, specifically in physical description. Things like parts of the spring bodysuit being there, or the eyes not being the right color, the head not looking new, etc. Some things just don't add up still, like how 77.8% of you watch these videos but don't subscribe because it's free and it really helps out the channel. Thank you very much. So how does this all add together? What do I actually think happened before Security Breach? Well, let's pop our mixture into the oven and see what kind of horrors rise. As Glitchtrap and Vanny begin to prep the Pizzaplex to become their hunting grounds and laboratory, Glitchtrap, otherwise known as the Mimic 1 program, knows that it wants to perform two actions. One, it wants to recreate what it's been seeing and help Wanted, and two, it wants to re-enter the physical world, so it can do that. So what better than the endoskeleton that the Mimic 1 program originally came from? The Mimic. Vanny and Glitchtrap have it shipped to the Pizzaplex through the same DLZ shipping company that they shipped most of the animatronics from. You can see that connective tissue in this FNAF video. They then bring it down to their base of operations, the old FNAF 6 pizzeria. Therein lies the remains of William Afton. The Mimic sees that old, burned, barely put together spring Bonnie suit, and it tries to put it on. It mashes the body, nearly destroying the corpse inside. Vanny, still believing that she's loyal to Afton, not really knowing about what the Mimic is at this point, realizes that the corpse of who she's trying to follow is being destroyed. She needs to salvage this. Carefully, she grafts this mess together to preserve whatever was left of William Afton. Just like Nexie, she fits this body onto the endoskeleton, and it's then that the Mimic is fused with William Afton's body, creating Burntrap. This explains one key detail that still doesn't have a very clean explanation: the difference in eye color. In the novels, the eyes of the Mimic are always described as big and white, crystal clear, but Burntrap clearly has large black eyes. This is that explanation, because when the Mimic and William fuse, the Mimic is infected with William's agony. For those who don't know, the books introduce a substance called agony. We know about Remnant from the games and books. It's essentially soul-made material, this silvery substance that can be infused into animatronics and give them life. The books delve into the idea of the yang to that yin, agony being the strongest human emotion, infecting objects all on its own, typically turning them pitch black. We see this with Shadow Bonnie in the books, or with Blackbird, or even Shadow Bonnie in FNAF AR, in where agony is called Dark Remnant. I think William's agony is the reason why Burntrap's eyes are black. And when all of this is said and done, Burntrap begins to recharge and goes into that charging station that we find him in. Or I'm wrong, which is super possible. Security Breach Ruin presented the FNAF community with a lot of questions, and I've been trying to answer them. But one surprising one that I didn't think I'd still have after Security Breach was, where the hell is Vanny? In that game, it seemed like she was just underutilized, but in Ruin, I expected to see her at least a little bit. But then I thought I understood why she wasn't here. Assuming the Princess Quest ending is canon, Vanessa, Gregory, and Freddy's head should have been out of the building way before it ever collapsed. But if that's true, then why is there Vanny graffiti all over the ruins of the Pizzaplex? That's what we're here today to solve. So slices, put on your aprons, and let's bake ourselves a theory. Let's start with where we last saw Vanessa, Security Breach. Her fate is heavily dependent on which ending actually brings us to Ruin. But what are those fates? Well, there's three main themes. The first that happens in the bad alleyway ending is that she's alive and well. We see Vanny survive and presumably keep working under Glitchtrap. The second theme is Vanny being confirmed dead. It's the outcome we see in the fire escape ending and the disassemble Vanny ending. Not a great track record so far, but there is one more theme we see in the Save Vanny ending, where Vanessa seemingly is freed of Vanny's influence because of the Princess Quest machine, and her, Gregory, and Freddy's head leave the Pizzaplex for good. Now, I hear you. I said that all the endings fit in those three themes, but I lied. I lied for dramatic effect. I'll do it again. Anyway, the other two endings just don't give us any information about Vanny whatsoever. The Van ending and the Burntrap ending don't show her even a little bit, so I guess she's probably fine. That's where she is at the end of Security Breach, but what about Ruin? That's actually where we run into our major problem. A problem like not checking out my second channel, RyeTwo, where highly edited gameplay videos get posted, like my part 1 of Ruin playthrough, my part 1 of My Friendly Neighborhood playthrough. You should go click link right there. Thank you very much for supporting it. Thank you. Anyway, like I said in the opener, at first this tracks with what we know about Ruin. Looking at the comic pages, Gregory seems to have invented all of these endings. The alley, the van, my favorite, the fire escape, disassemble Vanny, Burntrap, all except for one, save Vanny. That's the only ending not drawn by Gregory. But that's not all. We get to see 2 of the Princess Quest arcade machines, both of them off, one of them toppled on its side with an AR golden sword stuck into it. Even more than that, when we encounter Freddy in Phaser Blast, assuming he is the same one, he's on a pile of staff bots in the same location with the exact same damage on his chest. Also missing his head. Like, everything here points to the Save Vanny Princess Quest ending being canon, which lines up with what we see in Ruin. Vanessa, Gregory, and Freddy's head are nowhere to be found in this pizzaplex. They're no longer here. They left before everything collapsed. There shouldn't be any traces of Vanessa or Gregory left in that pizzaplex. At least no traces that are on the ruined part of it, but there are. The first functional staff bot we see, Mask Bot, that gives us the Vanny mask, has been carved and bent into having rabbit ears. Some of the mini music men have been modified to look like little rabbits. Now, sure, this could just be the influence of Afton, he is the rabbit guy after all, but what about Vanny specifically? Something only she would do. In a lot of spots of this ruined collapsed pizzaplex, there's graffiti, but specifically graffiti depicting Vanny. Graffiti that could have only been put there after the pizzaplex collapsed. So is Vanny out of the picture or isn't she? Did the Princess Quest machine even get beaten? Is that even the canon ending? Well, it is, but I don't think it's the only one. Let's look at what these comic pages mean to us. Does their existence necessitate that whatever they're depicting never happened? I'm not so sure. The game does tell us that Gregory created all of these, but look at the Burntrap comic page. We have a very clear and specific drawing of Burntrap and the Tangle, the new canon name for the Blob. It was in the file, so we officially know what the canon name is. And thank God, because it's way better than the Blob. Specifically from that ending. If we are to assume that this ending didn't happen, then this scene wouldn't have happened either. But the Tangle is real. We see it ourselves with our own eyes at the beginning of Ruin. So it's not like he created the idea of the Tangle. He must have seen it. The problem is, in Security Breach, if you've seen the Tangle, that means you've done the Burntrap ending. To get there, you go down a one-way elevator shaft, and then a one-way hole in the ground, then you see the Tangle. If Gregory saw the Tangle, the only way to keep going was further down, implying he would have then met Burntrap and done that boss fight. And if he did the boss fight, that would imply that the Tangle then took Burntrap away, and we see Freddy and Gregory escape to a hill somewhere. So is that what happens here? Well, I don't think that makes much sense either, because of what Gregory knows and because of Freddy. Freddy is the most apparent issue here. Even though he now has that prototype stamp on his foot, he is in the exact same position with the exact same damage to his shell. I don't see any reason for this to not be our Freddy. So if we see Freddy here, then he couldn't have been here. Second, in the Burntrap ending, Gregory beats Burntrap, then him and Freddy run out of the pizzaplex immediately and leave there for good. That's fine, we don't see Gregory in Ruin. Him not being at the pizzaplex makes sense. But in Ruin, he knows about the Mimic, and he knows about Mexus, and all this information that he wouldn't be privy to unless he was in that basement for a while. So he would have had to be down there for longer or have learned it from somebody else. Speaking of someone else, where's Vanessa this whole time? We technically don't have any information whatsoever on Vanessa or Vanny and her whereabouts in the Ruin DLC. There's no evidence of her existing. So does that mean Steelwool and Scott have just moved on from her entirely? I don't think so, because while we don't have evidence of her being here, we have a lot of evidence of her influence over the area. The Vanny-styled graffiti, the Vanny mask, the rabbit animatronics. I mentioned previously that while yes, rabbits are primarily a William Afton thing, Vanny herself was very obsessed with rabbits as his follower. But furthermore than that, what could Afton do in the physical world realistically? At least after the collapse of the Pizzaplex. The only piece of this game that I can figure could be influenced at all by Glitchtrap or William Afton in any way would be the Mimic or Helpy, presumably Glitchtrap. And the Mimic is trapped in the basement, and Helpy is in the AR world. Nobody here could do graffiti or physically modify animatronics, especially since the main Glamrock seem to not be affected by the Glitchtrap virus anymore. They would need physical help. It's why they called Cassie down there in the first place. So if there is rabbit-themed mischief all over the Pizzaplex before Cassie gets there but after the collapse, what gives? How is Vanny still here if Vanessa left? Well, Tales from the Pizzaplex book coming out in October might just have our answer. For those who are unaware, in the first week or so of October, we're scheduled to get the final book in the Tales from the Pizzaplex series, or at least the final book currently announced, Tales from the Pizzaplex number 8, B7-2. And like most of the books that's come out for the series, folks got their hands on it early and started leaking things pretty much immediately. It has a lot of information about the games, especially FNAF 4, which we will get into at some point, trust me. But one of those big bits of information comes from the sequel of B7. Now, I haven't covered B7 on this channel because I personally really don't like the story. The author has come out and admitted there was no malice or intent or anything like that. Accidentally or not, B7 has some really transphobic themes in it, and I do not want to cover it on the channel. Luckily, I don't even really have to talk about the plot or characters of B7 for what we're here for today. As with the previous book series in the franchise, the most important information here is the rules of the universe we're working in. Like in the Silver Eyes, I don't think the Silver Eyes happened one for one with the games. That's pretty much impossible at this point. Some things might have carried over, but rules like how Remnant works in the universe, very important, something we learned from the books. And likewise, something really important happens in B7 too. The first time I actually saw this mentioned was by GGY or Zarek5 on Twitter, where they went into the repercussions of B7 2. In that story, once our main character Billy finally snaps, he develops this different, strange, not himself personality. But in this sequel, we learn that he's able to separate from that personality as long as it has a vessel of its own, leaving him wholly separated from that darker version of himself. Zarek then extended that logic to Vanessa and Gregory, and I think he's right. But what would that mean for the story? Well, let's look back to Ruin. We get to see the two arcade machines that most likely held onto the lock on the minds of Gregory and Vanessa, Balloon World and Princess Quest. Quick catch up for you non-book readers. It's very likely that before the events of Security Breach, Gregory was actually working with Vanny as Patient 46 under the moniker GGY. For evidence, go to this video. And just as Vanessa's mind was locked inside the Princess Quest arcade machine, it's very likely that Gregory's mind was locked inside the Balloon World arcade machine in the daycare. Check this video for evidence. Anyway, back to it. We know that after you beat the third Princess Quest machine, the rabbit creature screams out and Vanessa is seemingly freed of Vanny, leaving the mask on the ground. I knew with all these ideas going on there was some kind of connection here, but I wanted some kind of other tangible evidence. And that's when I was talking to my thumbnail artist BarBADroid, and he mentioned that if you look at the arcade machines Princess Quest and Balloon World, there's this particle effect of something floating out of it, as if something recently left the machine. These, as far as I'm aware, are the only arcade machines that do this. And then it all fell into place. So bake with me for a moment as I lay out exactly what possibly happened in the lead up to Ruin. Just before Security Breach, either the conscious mind of Gregory or somebody else entirely beat the Balloon World arcade machine. This took GGY out of Gregory and returned it to the Afton-controlled arcade machine, leaving Gregory conscious but groggy and confused. It must have felt like he woke up from a very long sleep just before the game starts. His memory is slowly returning. This is why Gregory struggles with his own name right at the beginning of the game. Then by the end of it, he beats Princess Quest, doing that same service to Vanessa, freeing her. Now recently freed, the three of them leave the Pizzaplex off to better things and try to forget all of this that ever happened. All is not well at the Pizzaplex. From their perspective, those times are behind them. All the personas created under the Mimic 1 or Glitchtrap virus have been destroyed. They're long gone and the Mimic is trapped deep under the Pizzaplex. It's all good, but they didn't kill the infection. They just removed it from themselves. GGY and Vanny are still at the Pizzaplex. Their personality, their mannerisms, they just need new hosts. GGY being free a bit longer than Vanny was gave it a head start. And if it was personally created to serve the Mimic, and even called itself his favorite apprentice, of course it would go to it. And if GGY went to the Mimic, there's a high probability that this personality infected it, just as it did Gregory. After all, the Mimic is trying its hardest to recreate Gregory to trick Cassie. It would make a lot of sense if it got a head start by absorbing this GGY personality. But then that still leaves Vanny, still stuck inside the Princess Quest arcade machine. She also needs a vessel. So it's no mistake that GGY, as the Mimic, calls Cassie to the building and gives her the Vanny mask. Sure, the Mimic needs Cassie to deactivate the security nodes to free it, but throughout the game, it's testing Cassie and beginning to turn her into the perfect vessel for Vanny, and the Brazil ending is its final resolution. This feels really solid with the context that the books are giving us. We finally got a date, official gameplay, and even PC confirmation for Help Wanted 2, and I am beyond excited about it. So I'm going to be breaking down the press release and gameplay trailer that released this week to try to give you all the information there is, as well as my early thoughts and a prediction into the plot of the game. So slices, put on your aprons, and let's bake ourselves a theory. First, let's gather our ingredients and go over everything we got. First and most obvious is the trailer itself, but I think going over the blog post first will be more beneficial, mainly because it'll give us context so we know what we're actually looking at when watching the gameplay trailer. On blog.playstation.com, executive producer at Steelwool Ray McCaffrey posted an entire press release sharing honestly a lot of information about the game. Right away, we get the 6 categories that the games are going to be in. If you're confused as to what that means, if you remember Help Wanted 1, there were several categories depicting the different games within. There was FNAF 1, 2, and 3, as well as dark rooms, vent repairs, parts and service, and night terrors. I assume by categories, they're referring to those. He wrote, quote, backstage, Fazcade, staff only, food prep, ticket booth, and a special category containing new VR versions of Five Nights at Freddy's sister location gameplay. Now, what I think might be meaningful, and we'll get into it later, we actually don't get a name for the category that would contain those sister location games. It just says a category for the sister location game. So there could be potential spoilers linked to whatever name the category has, or also totally possible, it's just called Five Nights at Freddy's sister location, like in Help Wanted 1 when we have Five Nights at Freddy's 1, 2, and 3. He let us know that a big focus on the game was going to be mini-games with randomizable objectives in order to increase replayability, because a lot of people complained that Help Wanted 1 isn't super replayable because a lot of the mini-games are the exact same every time. So it was stressed that this will have a lot more random elements to it, like ingredients or orders or things like that. But they still do have some more curated experiences. And lastly, we get an explanation of each category, which is kind of huge. Backstage sees us as VIPs getting up close and personal with the animatronics. The example given is a minigame where we give Roxy a makeover. Fazcade will be more traditional minigames with things like Phaser Blast or Bonkabon. Staff only will be more hands-on types of jobs, and he mentions performing first aid. Food prep is, as it sounds, you're prepping food, but he gives something away that's very, very important at the end of that paragraph. Remember, the staff bot's serving orders do not need to sleep, eat, or stop ever, so don't get distracted wondering why you're the only human employee left. We will talk about that later. In Ticket Booth, we'll do more attraction-based games, like Captain Foxy's Cowboy Adventure, which we see in the trailer is pretty much what we thought the Foxy Log Flume was supposed to be. And finally, Five Nights at Freddy's Sister Location, where they seem to have reimagined a lot of the gameplay from Sister Location to make it more compatible for VR, as well as adding Custom Night. It's also mentioned that a PS5 exclusive minigame will be Mystic Hippo, in which she can read our fortune and she'll be the one leading us through the majority of the game. So, I mean, that's kind of hype. I won't experience the minigame because I'll be playing it on PC. I don't have a PS5 or a PSVR 2, and that's like $500 each. Look, the channel's doing really well, and I'm blessed with it. Not doing well enough that I could drop $1,000 to play a game that I already have a headset for on PC, so I just won't play that minigame. It's fine. But speaking of PS5 versus PC, the blog post ends out saying that the game will come out December 14th. And Steelwool later confirmed on Twitter that it will be releasing same day for PC. So huge win. One of my biggest fears going into this was that every single trailer kept saying PSVR 2 gameplay only. So I was like, am I gonna get to play it? Yeah, like I said, I'm being super real. If it didn't come out on PC, I just wasn't gonna play it. Also, super insane, this game comes out in like 3 weeks, so get ready. I will be live playing it day one on this channel, I guarantee you, so keep an eye out for that. All right, now that we have context, let's rip as much information out of this trailer as we can. Right away, we get a FNAF 6 Help Wanted style pep talk about working for Fazbear, but it actually uses these stills from FNAF 6 directly, like they're the same images. But that's not all. If you notice the slight vignette around the screen and the sound of the projector,
Clock in. The first day at a new job can be daunting, anxiety-inducing.
this seems a lot more real than anything we saw in Help Wanted. This could imply that this is actually really taking place and not another in-universe VR game, but we'll get into that later. Also worth mentioning is that Hand Unit mentions it's our first day, which could help us place it on the timeline somewhere. The first minigame that's actually shown is Phaser Blast, but it looks a lot different than what we see in Security Breach. This time, the sign for it is Western themed and the inside is the office for FNAF 1 for some reason. It's not at all laser tag. We then get the lobby of what I think we can safely assume to be Captain Foxy's Cowboy Adventure. After all, we know it exists from the blog post, that's Captain Foxy, and this lobby looks a lot like one of those old Western sheriffy kind of offices. The next shot is one of the food prep minigames, I assume, seeing as we're prepping food. And also worth noting is this kitchen timer on the desk. Now, yeah, sure, it's a kitchen timer, we're in a kitchen, it's probably just the timer for the minigame, but it is worth pointing out that kitchen timers like this appear in a lot of the minigames, so this seems to be a recurring theme. Whether that's important, who's to say? We then get a shot of the carousel minigame that was shown off at PAX, but specifically the circuitry of it. If I had to guess, this is probably a staff-only minigame, but I could see it being the ticket booth as well, since like it is a large attraction which would fit with what we know about ticket booth, but because it's more hands-on and we're not actually riding it, I think it is also possible that it's staff-only. It's really up in the air. Then we are doing the staff-only thing that was previously mentioned, medical support, where specifically we're helping Helpy feel better. I think. We are kind of just put a gas mask on him, but it's probably helping him. The thing to note here, though, is that it's a gas mask, which traditionally in medicine is a sedative. It's something that kind of dulls the pain. But the blog post specifically says, quote, Fazbear Entertainment doesn't have the necessary license to stock any sedatives, which does raise the possibility that this gas mask is nightmare gas. What is nightmare gas? I don't blame you for not knowing. In case you missed it, the last Tales from the Pizzaplex book had a story about a boy named Rory going through a never-ending, fully automated FNAF 4 nightmare experiment. He was trapped in chambers attached to the sister location bunker that would run mannequins and pretty much exactly recreate the FNAF 4 gameplay. But it was pumped full of hallucinogenic gas to induce nightmares and make everything seem very much more real and vivid than it was. This gas seems to sort of work like illusion discs, where it doesn't just create things, but it makes you see things way more realistic than they actually are, except that presumably gas would only work on a human, whereas illusion discs can be turned into something that can like affect robots. It's a little confusing. We don't have that much details on it. For one, technically it wouldn't make sense for us to be using that gas on Helpy because Helpy's a robot, but then again, it's FNAF, so who knows? Anyway, next we see one of the most interesting parts of the entire trailer. We're playing a matching card game with a Glamrock endoskeleton hooked up to a VR headset. The Glamrock endos are already suspected to be related to the Mimic, that endoskeleton antagonist from the End of Ruin that's able to copy and mimic things that it learns and sees and hears. But this whole setup, especially considering that Glitchtrap is primarily within a VR space the last time we visually see him, is very suspect, especially if you consider the fact that Glitchtrap could be interpreted as an extension of the Mimic's programming. So this is very Mimic coded. I wouldn't doubt if we get a lot more of Mimic's stuff in this game. We then get a scene from deeper in Captain Foxy's Cowboy Adventure, notably featuring the cardboard cutouts we see at the end of the Foxy log flume area from Ruin. And I should mention a couple things. One, this does kind of disprove my theory that these cardboard cutouts were used at a eatery, the Foxy Saloon, seeing as we're seeing them being used in this minigame. Two, very technically, I wasn't wrong. It is still a saloon, kind of, just not the one we were imagining. Yeah, that's not what I was imagining at all, so I was wrong. We then see this minigame mentioned in the VIP section of the blog post, aka giving Roxy a makeover. After that, what I imagined to be another minigame from the VIP section, making paper plate pals with Sun, which seems really cute. After that, we get the minigame I'm most excited to play, Bonkabon. We know a little bit about it thanks to the FNAF doco and other videos that were released by it, and we have confirmation that it's in the Fazcade section of the game. Yeah, this looks so goddamn fun, I really want to play it. After that, we see Blast again, but this time there are balloons being shot, so that's probably how the game functions. Again, it is super notable that although this makes sense to be something called Blast, this is 100% different from the Blast we see in Security Breach. Also, in the very beginning of this shot, you can see a wheel with FNAF 1 Freddy lit up. Underneath it is what looks like Toy Freddy, something we can't quite see, and then what looks like Nightmare Freddy. So I'm starting to think that the way this minigame will work is that we're shooting these balloons in FNAF-themed offices, and that wheel can randomly spin to give us a different office from a different game. After that, we're back to Helpy in the medical bay, but this time we're holding a bone saw. And the TV is telling us to cut something. Also, Helpy has rabies now and is missing a foot. Now, I know that some people said that this is probably popcorn because the advert on the TV mentions popcorn. To be fair, the blog post does say, and I quote, "or curing rabies." So I think rabies is super possible here. We get another shot of the carousel game, this time showing off Moon's presence in it. After this, we get one of many looks of a minigame where it seems like we're doing some sort of music or memory or Simon Says-esque game looking at the pads underneath that will have DJ Music Man slowly coming towards us as the threat. That seems super exciting. I can't wait to see how big DJ Music Man feels in VR. Then we have the redesigned version of probably one of the most hyped things in this game, the Sister Location Custom Night. And while the area is different, this definitely feels very similar and faithful to Custom Night. I mean, the map is the exact same. They probably just squeezed it so it's better in VR. After that, we get some context for that earlier endoskeleton game when we're doing the memory card thing. If you notice, on the left side, that's what that is, but now we're picking up a fast cam and flashing. Because of this, we know that we're in the endo daycare and that there's roaming aggressive endoskeletons in the background. All this combined, I think I'm pretty certain what this minigame all in is going to do. Essentially, we'll be trying to win a matching card game against an endoskeleton. But in the meanwhile, we'll have to protect ourselves from the endoskeletons in the background. And essentially, that will be the risk versus reward, right? Like, you can focus on protecting yourself, but the more you focus, the less you're looking at the cards and memorizing those. We then get a shot of Ballora in that Sister Location Custom Night, and we get another Sister Location minigame. This time, a reimagining of the Freddy, fuse section from Night 2. Now, we're looking for Funtime Freddy in that flashing room, but we have a megaphone that can directionally calm down Freddy if we see him. So we'll have to be doing the fuses and keeping an eye for where Freddy currently is. Almost forgot to mention that was the third and final minigame that was shown off at PAX, so important to mention there. As terrifying as that is, this does introduce the possibility of them bringing back Night 4, the dreaded minigame where you are trying to defend yourself from mini arenas and a springlock suit. The thing that, I can beat all of Sister Location pretty much deathless at this point, but Night 4 takes me 2 hours because it sucks. We then get a few shots of games we've seen and then one more shot of Blast from a different angle. An angle that disproves what I said 5 minutes ago, not even. Looking at this left side, there's a bunch of stuff. First off, number 1 crate's back, love that guy. There seems to be balls that we can throw. I don't know if that's set dressing or a mechanic, it's hard to tell. There's also a plush baby that needs to be shot, so thank God we finally can. But notably, the wheel that I mentioned earlier looks like it's just a dial of 4 things, those 4 things. And now that it's on Toy Freddy, we're still at FNAF 1, so part of me thinks that this might just be a difficulty, visual slider. And one more thing to note is that when he looks back, it's very brief. When he looks back at the FNAF 1 office, Bonnie and Chica are in the window and door, and there's now targets to presumably shut those doors. So for this minigame, it seems like we'll be shooting targets, trying to make sure the doors are shut, as well as defending ourselves from Plush Baby and who knows what else, which seems great. We then get a kind of shout out to those parts and service games from Help Wanted 1, but now with Glamrock Freddy and possibly the most scared game tester I've ever seen. Don't get me wrong, I love that. I think that's kind of funny, but if game tester, if you're watching this, I get it. You probably hammed it up for the trailer, but it was funny. After that, that, though, we do get something really strange, and I have no notes on this. It's just something I think is worth pointing out. We get this weird shot of like just a sun from the daycare, and that's it. Like, it's in total darkness. Not only that, but going to and from this is the only glitchy transition in the entire trailer. You know, I said I have no notes on that, and I have nothing written down, but now that I'm thinking about it as I'm recording, I'll get into this later, but I scripted it later. We'll get there when we get there, but I'm pretty sure we're playing as Vanessa before Security Breach in this game. And if that's true, and if the books and GGY are accurate to the games, then we know at some point Gregory also becomes a part of it and is working with Vanny and Glitchtrap. And if that's true, it's been speculated that the Balloon World arcade machine in the daycare is what's keeping his mind locked, like how Princess Quest is keeping Vanessa's. And if that's true, this strange, dark, daycare adjacent moment could be a look into some of the darker aspects of Help Wanted 2, where we, as Vanny, turning Gregory towards our side. Total shot in the dark, but if I'm right, I'm gonna brag about it. After that, we get more of the DJ Music Man game, and then another angle of the Helpy Medical Bay section. This time, we're grabbing a remote to turn off that advert, but on the right side, Scrap Baby is there suddenly. Now I'm pretty sure I also get this game. Essentially, we'll be trying to repair Helpy and fix him while keeping the noise down as to not alert Scrap Baby. After all, in the blog post, McCaffrey mentions that, quote, be as delicate as possible when sawing off limbs, because a patient's screams will draw unwanted attention. I think that tracks, but then I have to wonder, why the hell are we in the FNAF 6 location? Or, well, obviously, like, the FNAF 6 location is under the Pizzaplex, but like, why are the FNAF 6 animatronics here? Like, how is Scrap Baby still around? Regardless, after that, it's more of what we've seen, the Scrap Baby jump scare, and then the trailer ends. So that's everything we got on the game this week, and honestly, it's a lot. And now that we're all caught up to speed, I think I have a pretty solid idea on exactly what's going to be happening in Help Wanted 2. But there is something that's having me hesitate, so bake with me for a second. One of, if not the most important thing we got out of all of this for predicting what's going to happen in the game is this one throwaway line in the blog post. Quote, don't get distracted wondering why you're the only human employee left. But we do see that there are staff bots. Now, in the lore of Security Breach, we learned that Glitchtrap is able to get Vanessa the job as the head security guard after the Pizzaplex is built. It's technically not confirmed that this is how it worked, but essentially, Vanessa was pushed through to this position even though she has no prior qualifications, and her interviewer was like, she seems nice, but I don't know why she got offered the job. But once she's in there, Glitchtrap and Vanny start firing people off of the job as much as they can, even for minor infractions. Now, again, not directly through email or digital means, so it's implied that Glitchtrap is the one doing this. Eventually, the Pizzaplex holds an all-staff meeting where they gather up all of the remaining human employees and fire them all at once. It's implied that they actually kill them. It's not confirmed, but it's implied, fully replacing every other employee with a staff bot except for Vanessa. That way, no humans can get in the way with what Vanny and Glitchtrap are trying to do. This all happens before Security Breach. So with this in mind, there's a time in the timeline for some stretch of time that we don't know, where it's just Vanessa and staff bots at the Pizzaplex. So if in Help Wanted 2, we're the only human employee left at the Pizzaplex with staff bots, we're Vanessa. Again, because in Help Wanted, we're also probably Vanessa. This whole game, unlike the first game, might be the real world, not an in-universe VR game. It might be what Vanessa was doing before Security Breach to make it easier for Glitchtrap and Vanny to do what they need to do. It could be we're playing as Vanny, helping to rebuild Burntrap. Realistically, if we're playing as Vanessa, we're playing as Vanny too, because at least I'm fairly certain they're the same person sharing a mind. In fact, this theory also tracks mechanically with Help Wanted 1. In that game, there were the normal minigames, but if you pulled a lever, you could switch to the black light hard mode version of the games and play harder, slightly changed versions of everything. If they want to keep that mechanic for Help Wanted 2, I could totally see it that we play through the games normally as Vanessa, but then the hard mode versions are Vanny doing shenanigans to spread Glitchtrap throughout the entire Pizzaplex. This is all really good stuff, and it could tell us so much about the gap in the timeline from Help Wanted to Security Breach. And it could answer so many questions from Security Breach and the current state of the lore in general. But I have one snag. Sister Location and Scrap Baby. That's two snags. If this is actually happening and not a VR recreation, how in the world are we going to get to Sister Location? Let alone the animatronics still being at Sister Location. After all, at the end of that game, all the endoskeletons escape as entered within Michael Afton. So there should be nothing but empty animatronic shells if we were to go there at this point in the timeline. Let alone that Scrap Baby is one half of what eventually becomes of Ennard. So Scrap Baby doesn't exist if the fun times are still intact. This is something we might just have to wait and see for, but I thought I'd throw out a couple ideas in case one of them's right. Possibility number one, before I get too deep in the possibilities, it's totally possible this whole game is another VR recreation. So just get that out of the way right now. Number two, there is a possibility that since the shells of the fun times were left behind, whatever is powering them right now isn't the fun time endoskeleton. After all, if the Glamrock endoskeletons are like the Mimic, one of the main abilities of the Mimic is that it can reshape its endoskeleton to fit into any animatronic costume. So there's a chance that in this part of the timeline, if we're going back to Sister Location, some Mimic endoskeletons get in those exoskeletons and the fun times are back again. This technically could even explain Scrap Baby if her shell is still in the FNAF 6 pizzeria. For number three, there's one more theory I had that I have a feeling is going to be a bit controversial. Help wanted to establish that the FNAF games we've played in this franchise are actual in-universe indie games that were made to cover up what actually happened. Now, they are true to what actually happened. It's stated that they are factual in a sense to cover up and make it seem fantastical and impossible when it really did just happen. But keep in mind, these games were still made by one indie dev who didn't have access to everything that actually happened and probably just heard things down the grapevine like everybody else did. What I'm trying to get at is that the events that happened in those FNAF games probably still happened, but the way they happened and how it looked could have been different if the indie dev couldn't have been there. And sure, FNAF 1, 2, and 3, those were real locations that were open to the public, but Sister Location was not open to the public, the bunker anyway, or the FNAF 6 location was not open to the public. So whatever was in there, presumably, the indie dev wouldn't have seen with his own eyes. What I'm getting at here is it is technically possible that whatever the recreations of Sister Location we see in Help Wanted 2 are, that could be what the Sister Location bunker actually looks like in the FNAF timeline, and whatever we saw in the games is what the indie dev thought it looked like. Not only that, but the fun times still being in there could suggest that the Sister Location we know didn't happen at all. To be fair, if that's true, then Scrap Baby wouldn't exist and she's here. I don't know, but I think it's worth stating that to at least start the brainstorm. That's probably not likely or possible, but it might be on the right track. The newest Five Nights at Freddy's game, Help Wanted 2, comes out in literally 6 days. This still doesn't even feel real. But as the week before a new FNAF game comes, so does my best prediction. If you've been watching the channel and podcast for about the past month or so, then you probably have a pretty good idea what I'm going to say. So let's not waste any more time preambling. Slices, put on your aprons, and let's prep ourselves a prediction. So consider this your final spoiler warning. For legal reasons, this is a joke. I don't actually know anything that is currently unreleased. If I'm right, Steelwool, I promise I don't have anyone on the inside, I just got lucky. For the first chunk of today's video, we're going to chronicle all teasers and trailers leading up to the game, as well as a speculative timeline for where the game might be placed. That way, when we're in the second half and I'm giving the prediction, I don't need to reference as much and you know where I'm coming from. In June's PlayStation Showcase, we got the first teaser trailer for Help Wanted 2, which showed us the Sister Location elevator crashing through its elevator shaft. All the while, Hand Unit welcomed us back for another week and that we did an adequate enough job the first time. So we've been here before, presumably. The posters in the elevator shaft have been tweaked as well. Notably on the bottom left, there's one with Bonbon and Bonette being hit by a hammer. This is later known as Bonkabon that we'll get into. Another huge important change is that this elevator has changed itself. There's been an addition in the bottom right, one of the wire puzzles from Ruin, something that would have only been around during the Pizzaplex. The teaser ends with a Ballora jump scare, but something notable happens just before that in my opinion. Once we enter the darkness, there is a shushing sound that can be heard. Now, this might be nothing. It might just be some pipes going by or the doors settling, but between shushing being something that the marionette does and the fact that the hallucinogenic gas in the books is described as a shushing sound, I think this noise is relevant to at least bring up. It might be nothing, but it's worth mentioning. In between then and now, we got apparent radio silence from Steel Wool. And I say apparently because some fans argue that they've been actually seeding things out on social media ever since. For anyone that doesn't know, Steel Wool had been posting something called Guess the Sketch since May of this year on Twitter. It started out being all over the place. Essentially, they would post a sketch of something and we'd have to guess, and we'd have like a day to figure it out. And it was random, things like Blip from Space Ghost, Sonic Shoes, or Combat Carl from Toy Story. But then, right around August 28th, notably after Ruin had already come out, Steel Wool started adding other tags to their Guess the Sketch post. Quote, #Ruin, #Security Breach, #Ruin DLC, #FNAF. So what have those Guess the Sketch posts been since then? It could very well still be nothing. But some folks in the community have suggested that these tagged posts hide deeper meanings. Here's the best I could come up with. Again, this might feel like a stretch, but who knows, it might be relevant. It's worth looking into at least. The first one was the Fairchild Channel F, the first video game console based on a microprocessor, and it was released in 1976. Now, this might just be a reference to the 70s being important, as that's when Fredbear's Family Diner would have been made somewhere in the 70s. There's a very, very small chance that maybe this is implying Fredbear's was founded in 1976. After all, the Fairchild Channel F was a new innovation of technology, and so would have Fredbear's been. But again, huge stretch there. Regardless, it's queuing us up to the 70s being important. The next Guess the Sketch was of Figaro Foe. Now, this is a character from a 2015 cartoon. The date doesn't seem important there. What does seem relevant, though, is that it's a character who, in the cartoon, has every known phobia. Now, this isn't anything specific, but I think this is more so a reference to Tales from the Pizzaplex. After all, many of the stories within Tales from the Pizzaplex are just titled different phobias, so that's pretty thematic. The next one was literally the crying child. I don't think I need to tell you why that could be important. After that, it was the cover of the NES game Fester's Quest. The game came out in 1989, which may or may not be a relevant date, but once again we are looking at the past. After all, the Addams Family originally aired 1964 to 1966, so 60s, 70s, early FNAF timeline. And the last Guess the Sketch I think is honestly the strangest one. It's the only one that has two separate characters, it's the only one that uses a different method of sketching, aka this kind of format. And 3, the characters themselves are just really strange. It was Andre the Giant and Metal Sonic. Now, this is probably the biggest stretch I've ever said on my channel, and maybe ever going forward, but bake with me for a second. And I really need to emphasize, when I say bake with me for a second, what I'm about to say might just straight up be wrong. So take this with a grain of salt, I beg you, but hear me out. Metal Sonic, I think, could be a nod to the Mimic. After all, it's a robot built to replicate something else. And I know, that's kind of a stretch, but that's also kind of understandable. It's like, okay, Metal Sonic is literally a mimicking robot, I could see that. But if that's the case, why is it being paired with Andre the Giant? Well, for anyone that doesn't know, Andre the Giant is a pro wrestler turned actor from the mid to late 1900s who suffered from gigantism because of excess growth hormones. This caused him to be 7'4" and 520 pounds. Now again, he got his start in pro wrestling, but a lot of people nowadays know him more for his acting career. In fact, I don't think it's any kind of a stretch to argue that 90% of the people nowadays who know Andre the Giant probably know him from one of his most famous roles, Fezzik from The Princess Bride. I know at least most people in my generation first go, oh hey, it's Fezzik from The Princess Bride. So why do I mention all of this? Well, the movie The Princess Bride came out in 1987. You could argue, again, this could all be wrong, take it with a grain of salt. You could argue that Steel Wool posted a representation of the Mimic and an actor from a famous movie that came out in 1987. So is this Steel Wool directly confirming that the Mimic did the bite of 87? No, but it's interesting to think about. Maybe there is some correlation with whatever happened in 1987 and the Mimic. Maybe. Very, very maybe. But not to mention, this is also the last Guess the Sketch since September 26th. They have not posted since then. At least not posted a Guess the Sketch. So whatever this was, meant to end it. After that, we see 3 of the games from Help Wanted shown off at PAX. And thanks to Steel Wool, they allowed some YouTubers to record footage, so we got to see it. They showed off Bonkabon, referencing that poster I mentioned earlier, where it's just whack-a-mole but with Bonbon, Bonette, Scrap Baby plushes, and avoiding Helpy. Notably, it looks like it takes place in a Security Breach Pizzaplex arcade. Granted, this wasn't the final version of the game, but it's worth mentioning. The second game they showed off is the reimagining of the breaker room section from Sister Location. Now, as we're doing breakers, instead of checking on Freddy and playing a room sound, we have to constantly look for Freddy and use a directional megaphone to keep him away. The third game showed off was Carousel, where a player is repairing fuses inside of a carousel while defending themselves from Moon. This sort of functions as the first teaser of gameplay since Steelwold knew that it was going to be uploaded to YouTube. Finally, a few weeks ago we got the combo of the big blog post from PlayStation and the full gameplay trailer. I've gone over it heavily on this channel before, so I'm only going to go over some of the relevant information for today's video. If you want to know the full breakdown of the trailer and blog post, the video's right there. In the blog post, it's clear that we're going to be a worker at the Pizzaplex. Not only that, but we are, quote, the last human employee left. Whether or not this is a VR simulation of working at the Pizzaplex or actually doing it, it's still not confirmed either way. The post also tells us the categories of games that we'll be playing. Quote, backstage, staff only, Fazcade, food prep, ticket booth, and FNAF Sister Location. It also mentions near the end that the majority of the game will be narrated by Mystic Hippo, which, by the way, we just got a teaser image of yesterday of her. So, based. The trailer itself mostly just showed us different games that we'll be playing, including all 3 games shown off at PAX. However, some notable things is that we hear it's our first day of work, which goes against what we heard in the first teaser. The opening slideshow looks much more realistic than anything in Help Wanted 1, implying this could be taking place in the real world, and we get more shots of Sister Location, and we even see Scrap Baby. We actually see Scrap Baby twice, one in this area, and again her updated jump scare to close out the trailer. So that is, in my opinion, all the relevant information from new posts and publications about Help Wanted 2. But what about the FNAF timeline surrounding this game? Now, I'll try to stick to things we know for almost certain here. For example, it's stated and shown multiple times that we will be at the Pizzaplex for this game. Whether or not it's a VR recreation of the Pizzaplex, still no way to confirm that, but we're going to be at the Pizzaplex. And if we're at the Pizzaplex, as far as placement goes in the timeline, we're definitely taking place after Help Wanted 1. After all, in the last update for Help Wanted 1, there was the secret ending where you do Pizza Party, but instead of being stuffed, you go out a side door and you can see the Pizzaplex being built. So we know that the Pizzaplex was being built around the same time Help Wanted was meant to be released. And we're also fairly certain that Security Breach has to take place after Help Wanted 2. After all, if we are actually in the Pizzaplex, it can't take place after Security Breach. No matter which ending you get in Security Breach, and no matter which ending is canon, we know that Ruin happens afterwards. And if Ruin happens after Security Breach, the Pizzaplex is demolished. So if we're at the Pizzaplex in Help Wanted 2, it has to be before Security Breach and after Help Wanted 1, which is honestly a pretty specific timeline placement for a FNAF game. However, it wouldn't be FNAF if there wasn't some problems with that timeline placement. Namely, the fact that, and I've mentioned this before, the fun times are here, and Scrap Baby is here. After Sister Location, all the Funtime animatronics shed their shells and fuse into Ennard, and Ennard leaves the bunker. So if the Funtimes are still walking around, it would have to take place before Sister Location. And then by FNAF 6, Ennard has split into Scrap Baby and Molten Freddy, and at the end of FNAF 6, they both melt. So as of Security Breach, neither the Funtimes nor Scrap Baby should be still around, let alone them both being around at the same time. Keep in mind, Ennard is what turns into Scrap Baby, so the Funtimes and Scrap Baby can't coexist. I mean, hell, one of the Funtimes is Circus Baby. How could these two exist at the same time? I'll be attempting to answer that in the prediction, so let's get into that prediction. And the best part about putting this video out right now is that, like I said, the game comes out on the 14th. I'll be playing it live on this channel the minute it drops, unless it drops at like 4 AM or something. So that way we'll learn very soon if I'm right or not. Not only that, but next week's video on the 15th will be the full plot and lore summary of Help Wanted 2. So within a week, we'll be able to compare and contrast my prediction with the reality and see if I was any close. So if you want to see both of those, please just, the subscribe button is right there. Just give it a little tickle, little push, little shove. It means the world to me. Thank you so much. Anyway, on to the prediction. The game begins and we are playing as Vanessa, sitting in on an automated orientation for her new job as head security guard at the Pizzaplex. We learn of the various duties we'll have while working there, and then we can start the game. This functions sort of as the rail ride from the first game. The first half of this game will see us playing through the games we've heard about in these blog posts. Normally, essentially, we're doing our job as Vanessa, probably collecting coins again, but not tapes this time. Instead, I think we'll be collecting various crafting supplies throughout the minigames. Things like white fabric, ribbons, eyes, buttons, I think we'll be making the Vanny mask that she wears in Security Breach. Before Ruin, I was willing to believe that this mask we see in Help Wanted and the Security Breach trailers, and this mask we see Vanny wear are the same thing. Just a cool redesign that made the Vanny model look nicer. But then, Ruin brought the Vanny mask. And yes, I'm going to be purposely mispronouncing it. I know it's pronounced Vanny, but just to differentiate them easily, I'll be saying Vanny when referring to this mask. Oh, have fun in the Pizzaplex. He almost made it the whole video. I'm proud of him. You'll see him again in the outro. At this point, I'm convinced that these are two separate masks. One of them, this one, is what turns you into a Glitchtrap servant. It's what Vanessa collects at the end of the DLC. It's what Cassie uses during Ruin. Whereas this one is something Vanessa made to allow her to still access the AR world. How fitting is it then that in Help Wanted 1, we are collecting this Vanny mask, and in Help Wanted 2, we're creating this Vanny mask. Once the mask itself is complete, we unlock the hard mode levels of Help Wanted 2. In the normal game, we're just doing our job as Fazbear intends. But in hard mode, I think we'll be modifying the Pizzaplex to allow Glitchtrap to take over. The perfect example of this, I think, can be found in Backstage. So we know for a fact that Backstage is going to have us up close and personal with the animatronics. At least it's confirmed that this minigame from the trailer where we're doing a Roxy makeover is one of the Backstage minigames. Well, if our normal duties is doing something like testing out Roxy's makeover functions, I could see a Vanny hard mode minigame being this one from the trailer, where we're modifying Glamrock Freddy, possibly inputting the Glitchtrap program inside of programming. After all, this minigame, Roxy's on and active, looking around, we're in her makeup room, it just makes sense. But this one, we're in some back room, and Freddy's seemingly off. I think these two aspects are the majority of the game. So I hear you. What about the ending? What about the fun times? And what about Scrap Baby? We'll go chronologically. Scrap Baby, I think, makes a decent amount of sense. Look at where we see her. We're in a room with a monitor that plays distracting advertisements with a vent to one side. Doesn't this room look familiar? I think this minigame is Vanessa literally practicing working on robotics to get ready for Vanny to work on Burntrap. And she'd be doing this in that buried FNAF 6 location under the Pizzaplex, which is where Scrap Baby was last located. But if Scrap Baby is still there, did Henry do nothing? Did he kill himself for no reason? After all, at the end of FNAF 6, all the animatronics and people in that building were meant to be burned into nothing. But again, look at the quote from the schematic we're using to infer this. Quote, "There is a possibility that overheating might neutralize the effects permanently." On one hand, the word might is there, so you could argue that Williams' hypothesis was wrong and it didn't neutralize it. But that's not even necessary to explain Scrap Baby's presence here. Henry's plan might still have worked, and he might have neutralized all the remnant that was in those animatronics. But nowhere do we know the melting point of the animatronics themselves. Let's say it worked. Overheating it neutralized all the remnant in, for example, Scrap Baby, and melted away all of the spirit inside of her. Would it have also melted the animatronic? Is it not possible that the remnant was burned out, but the robots remain? If that's the case, many Fazbear and associated animatronics built by these two are programmed to seek out noise. It's like a party thing. And if that's the case, this minigame could literally be us up against the original programming of Circus Baby. It's not that Scrap Baby is haunted by Elizabeth and trying to kill Vanessa, it's that we're making noise near Circus Baby, and she's going to check it out. But once she realizes she's alone with another person, she scoops you. After all, her jump scare uses her scooper arm. Alright, so then what about the fun times? I'm honestly still a little stumped with this one, but I have a pretty solid idea on how it could work. It's not very evidence-backed, but it's more so a logical conclusion. If Help Wanted 2 is meant to explain how Security Breach came to be, why not also Help Wanted 1? We know that Glitchtrap initially forms because when they were creating Help Wanted 1, Fazbear gave them a lot of old technology to scan into the video game, and one of those pieces of technology, when scanned in, materialized Glitchtrap. These sister location minigames could show us Fazbear going back to that bunker to get stuff for the future. After all, the sister location bunker has just collected dust throughout this timeline when it's not in use. It's never been confirmed to have been destroyed. It's possible that before sister location happened, someone from Fazbear went down there to collect anything they could find. But now in Help Wanted 2, we're seeing the tapes or logs of whoever did that. That way we can still have sister location gameplay gameplay this far into the timeline. Does it make a lot of sense? I don't know, but it's honestly the only explanation I can think of until the game comes out. And finally, what is the ending going to be? Again, I lean on Help Wanted 1. Canonically, Help Wanted ends with Vanessa's mind being taken over by Glitchtrap, and we see that in some of the endings, arguably best represented with this one when we're locked in that metal door. By the end of Help Wanted 1, Glitchtrap has a human asset. I think Help Wanted 2 will function the same way, but this time with Gregory. I think the ending of this new game will have us strapping Gregory into some kind of on-rails ride, probably even giving him the Van Eye mask. It'll take him through the daycare into that daycare room that we find with all that secret lore stuff. Note the moving sun in the trailer for Help Wanted 2. Eventually, it might even lead him to the Balloon World arcade machine or something similar. Then Glitchtrap will take over his mind, giving us GGY, the Vanny version of Gregory.